Okay, so we're going to start with the pencils because that's more similar to what we learned in graphite. You have hard, medium, and soft pencils. I'm sure other brands will have them labeled differently, but the premise is still the same as graphite. So we're looking at the different ways you can blend them, looking at different levels of pressure. Charcoal is going to respond a lot to pressure, I think more so than graphite does. And here I'm using my blending stump. Make sure you don't mix materials with your blending stump. So you should have a charcoal blending stump and then a graphite blending stump, and don't combine them because you're going to transfer the medium onto your drawing. And unless that's what you're going for, you don't want that. Keep in mind that the levels of hardness is about the additives that are in the material. So if it's softer, it's going to have less additives, so the material is going to move more. So it's not that you're drawing lighter, it's that you're putting more or less of the charcoal onto the paper. And what makes it lighter is the paper showing through. So when you have a softer pencil, you're putting way more material onto the paper. Like if you can see right there where I just drew it, it's way darker because there's way more material. When you're working with charcoal, you really want to build value. When I just drew that line, it's a little darker than I intended, and I had a little bit of trouble blending it out. If you keep adding to it and keep moving the material around, you can blend it, but just be aware of how much pressure you put initially. So next we have vine and stick charcoal. Vine charcoal is literally a burnt vine. I think it's a grapevine. You may also hear about willow charcoal, which is a willow branch. So here I'm showing you the lines, light shading, hard shading. Vine charcoal is going to move a lot because it doesn't have any binders. So it's going to blend easily, but you're going to have a lot of the paper shining through. So it's really good for smooth blending on midtones, but it's not going to give you super dark darks. Whereas on the other hand, stick charcoal is going to give you really dark darks. You can control how much pressure you have, but look where I pushed harder on the second step on the stick charcoal. There's so much powder because I'm putting so much material on there. So you could actually buy charcoal powder to work on smoothing in your values if you have an applicator like a paintbrush or a Q-tip, or even your finger, although you're not supposed to do that because the oils can damage the paper. But if you just want a little bit of powder, you can just do this on a scratch sheet of paper and get that powder. So here I'm just preparing some swatches to practice erasing. I'm going to blend it out just so I can show you how it looks to erase a blended area. When you are blending, keep in mind that you're losing the texture of the paper, so if you like that, you might not want to blend. But also when you're erasing the top level, whereas you've pushed or blended the material into the cracks of the paper. That's why it looks smoother. So when you're erasing, you might have trouble getting the material that's been put into the cracks of the paper because the paper is textured. I apologize for the shaky camera, but you can see here that I'm using the kneaded eraser. I went in and pushed hard with it, and then I tried blotting it. It's really hard to blot that stick charcoal because there is so much on the paper. I will add, do not wipe your paper like I just did. You saw how it smeared. So now we're going to, again, make swatches, blend it in, and we're going to look at erasing an entire area versus just a strip. And you can see that the vine charcoal comes up pretty easily. Even though I blended it into the cracks of the paper, you still have a little bit of residue, but the stick is going to be a lot harder to get up. So here I'm going to show you, I have a scrap piece of paper. If I wanted to make charcoal powder without having to buy it, because I only wanted to use a small amount, or you just want to try it. If you wanted a new texture, you could just leave this how I have it. The texture of the bristles is showing in the brush strokes. Or you could just smooth it out and get really smooth value gradations. And then here I'm going in using the same material but with a blending stump. So I'm going back to the powder and picking up material and almost drawing a softer line than I would with the pencil or with the stick, and just drawing with the stump. So white charcoal which is actually just chalk because you can't have white charcoal. I would not add this until the very end of your drawing. When you blend over it, it kind of gets a bluish, grayish tint. You can already see that it's not the same color as your paper, but if you have a toned paper, it's going to be even more obvious unless you properly use that tone as a value itself. I usually use white charcoal with really small details or with something like a highlight that I want to erase and I can't get quite small enough. If you're starting with a new piece of vine charcoal, it's really long. I usually just break mine in half before I get started. So here I'm drawing a reflective vase. I think charcoal is really good at punching in super dark values, and reflectives are really successful when you have really dark darks and really punchy highlights. So I'm starting with the vine charcoal. I'm getting in my measurements. I'm contouring the form just like I would in the pencil drawing. It's helping me understand it, but it's also laying material on the page, and I smooth it out with my finger, which I know you're not supposed to do, but I do it. Anyway, you could use a tissue or a blending stump or a Q-tip or a paintbrush, whatever suits your style. So I'm still using the vine charcoal. I'm just pushing a little harder to put more material on the page, but I'm not ready to commit to those lines yet. I'm still figuring out the form, and since vine charcoal is easy to erase, I've stuck with that so far. Now this darker form is something that's reflected in the vase, so that's why it's kind of irregular. But I'm blending it in and just laying down an overall mid-tone value that I can erase out highlights and add in darker values. And when I blended, I kind of messed up my edges, so I'm just going to go back in and make sure I keep those straight and the edges are kind of crisp, erase them out. So when I initially had drawn the reflected object, the darker form in there, I kind of blended it out, but I'm just adding it back in. So for me, when I use charcoal, I usually just layer and layer and layer, and my first few layers are always vine charcoal because I feel like I have a lot more control over that and a lot less commitment. Whereas stick charcoal is going to lay a lot of really dark material on there, and a pencil is going to draw kind of a harsh line, and I'm not ready for any of that with my drawing at the stage it's in right now. I'm using my blending stump to draw lines, and now I'm going in to kind of refine those edges with the pencil. See how it leaves a line? So when you first start out, you don't really want to start with the pencil, just when you're doing details or you want to do some harsh edges. It will lay down a lot of material, like here you can see it's a lot darker than the vine charcoal, and I can blend that out. But I use the pencil because I want these curved lines to really show the curve around the vase, so it looks more round. So then I took the side of the charcoal stick and I just ran it up and down. You're getting super textured lines. You can see the texture of the paper, but I'm going to blend all of that out. I just wanted a lot of material and a lot of powder on the paper so that I can move it wherever I want. And now I'm going in with my eraser. I'm creating my highlights. Things are really drastic right now. There's a lot of lines, like there's lines of black. There's also the lines of where I've erased. But I'll be able to smooth that out as I continue drawing. Like right now I'm doing it with a blending stump. Here I'm blending in the really dark areas so that when I move to the next area, I'll have material on the stump and I can draw with a really soft value instead of like a hard line or a really harsh value shift. And then again, I'm blending with my finger, which I know you're not supposed to do. Don't tell anyone I told you to do it, but I chose to do it because I knew that my blending stump had too much charcoal on it and I didn't want to be making new lines. I just wanted to be blending out those highlights. Then I showed you my finger was covered in charcoal. So if you're going to do that, which again, I told you not to do it, but if you do it, just make sure you wipe off your finger before you use it again. I think that reflections come across really well when they're thin lines of really high contrast. So I think that's my main focus in this piece, is I have the thin line, so I used a pencil to get it really thin, and then I used my cut eraser to get a really exact line to hopefully give a better illusion of the reflection and of the surface being shiny and reflective. Now here I'm going in and cleaning up my edges. I'm using the white eraser because it's going to help me get the paper as white as possible. I feel like the kneaded eraser is really good for lifting value or for trying to work in a really small area. Also keep in mind, like we talked about before, the white eraser is going to be way harder on your paper, and I really need it white, and I'm not going to be drawing in that area later, so I'm okay with it kind of not damaging my paper, but roughing it up a little bit more than a kneaded eraser would. If you see here, I'm using the stick, and again, the texture of the paper showing. If this is your style, you can leave it like this without blending anything. I like to see both blending and kind of the hand of the artist in the drawing, but that's me. Some people are going to blend it out totally. Some people are going to use it really textured. It's really up to your discretion and what you think works best with your skill and with your style. So I've sped this second demo up a little bit. It's a glass cup instead of the reflective vase. The premise is going to be about the same, but I'm going to want to maintain more white space to make sure it looks clear. As usual, I'm using Vine charcoal until I figure out the shape. It also helps me smooth and blend out that solid value that I can erase highlights out of and add shadows into. And now using my pencil, I'm kind of straightening up the edges and laying down the final lines that I think should be the boundaries of the cup. I'm designating where it should be lighter. I'm erasing out the middle because that's where I have a highlight, and then you see I have the gray on the sides. And now I'm going in with my pencil because I really want fine lines. So this is a glass cup, so I really want to maintain my white whites and get that high contrast of the really dark, very small black areas. I'm going in with my blending stump and kind of blending out that gray area while also adding a little bit more material, erasing out the edges where I've kind of let it bleed out a little bit. And if you notice now, I'm using the pencil again, but my lines are way darker. So I did add value, but now I'm adding even darker value. So be aware that, yeah, you can change materials, but you can also change your pressure and the angle that you hold the material with. And I'm adding softer values with my blending stump, erasing out highlights, continuing to do lines with my pencil. It's really the same process, but with this you're going to want to maintain your white, and you're going to want to exaggerate the super darks without really having a mid-tone so it looks really clear. Here I'm going in and darkening things, I'm cleaning up my edges, erasing out where I've messed up, tightening up the edges with the pencil, just lightly making it more solid instead of a fuzzy line, because I really want it to seem like heavy glass. And I erased out a line in the front through the black, almost like it was like a reflection, but you can still see the values behind it. And then I grab my white charcoal or my chalk pencil, and I go in and add the little tiny lines. It's really effective with the tiny lines because I can't erase out that thin, especially on that dark of an area, and I waited to the end so I didn't get that bluish tint on the white chalk. This is the final demonstration right before I show you how to spray fix. I'm going to speed it up a lot more because it's the basic techniques I've been using in the previous two videos. So as you finish your drawing, you're going to want to think about how you're going to store it and keep it safe. I like to use spray fix. Spray fix kind of adheres the charcoal to the paper, but if you use workable fixative, you can still go back in and erase some things. Be aware that your drawing is still susceptible to smearing. Charcoal is really loose, and you just need to be careful with it either way. Some people don't spray fix their artwork because they think it will make the values look dull, or maybe it'll darken it a little bit. But either way, up to your discretion. Just make sure you put it somewhere safe, like between two pieces of newsprint. If you do choose to spray fix your drawing, try it on a test drawing first. If you have a scratch sheet you've been messing around with the whole time, just spray that and see how your drawing reacts. So when you're actually spraying the drawing, you want to start off of the drawing, maybe like in a top corner, and you want to stay back away from it a little ways. And you want to spray back and forth, gradually going on the drawing, and then going off the drawing. So if you went left to right, next do the same thing up and down, starting off the drawing first. Notice how I'm doing this outside. This is a really strong smell, and you need to do it in a well-ventilated area.